Kamala Harris's campaign has had an interesting run, as Blaze senior politics editor Chris Bedford put it in his latest Beltway brief. It went from brat summer to Adolf autumn. He joins us now to discuss this bizarre trajectory. So, Chris, what do you make of Harris's campaign tactics down the final stretch?
I think it's the stupidest national campaign of my lifetime. I've never seen one run so off the wall. At first, without the excuse of COVID, they skipped interviews. They skipped public appearances. They wouldn't even let the VP out there because he couldn't talk about any of the policies because they weren't going to share the policies. This is after they skipped the primary. Now, that part, at least to me, made sense. I didn't think a last-minute primary would be good for their chances. They ended up with a candidate no one wanted. Then they tried to play catch-up, where they just waltzed her and waltzed him into interview after interview they were completely unprepared for and unpracticed for, aside from the debate performance, where she did pretty well. And then you just had the messaging the entire time, that kind of like extra viral, tongue-in-cheek, gay Instagram, TikTok influencer-driven strategy to try and it's the kind of thing that might excite kids who are in college, but it's not actually going to gain back the voting blocks. It's not the sort of thing that would get Barack Obama's coalition back together. And remember, I think they're trying to copy some of the pop culture things that popped up around Barack Obama, but those were done by his fans, not by the campaign itself. Those were signs of his successes in the popular culture, not a main driving force. And over again, they've drilled down on the Hitler thing, and I get it. It's not about convincing independents necessarily. A lot of it's about trying to drive voter turnout. And Democrats have been able to do really well in the polls ever since 2016, 2018, 2020, 2022. Democrats did really well with the Hitler thing, but it's been worth less each time, just getting them by a little bit less each time, maybe holding the ground. And I think a lot of voters have moved on. And any actual scientific, real, expensive measure of what voters care about confirms the age-old axiom that it is the economy, and right behind that is the border. Every moment they're not talking about that, they're not doing well. And since the Dobbs decision, too, Donald Trump as Hitler is significantly less important to a lot of Democrat female voters in particular than abortion. So on the one hand, they are spending money. The super PACs are spending money. The more serious people, I think, are spending money pushing the economic message, pushing the abortion message. But Kamala Harris is still up there doing January 6th. And then, of course, there's good old Joe Biden, not invited to the party, but he's crashing it anyways, absolutely screwing the whole thing up for her. It just seems like an incredibly weak finish. And listen, this might end up proving my thesis wrong. My thesis, we talked about in the show, being that in retrospect, most political races are obvious. But it seems like this is kind of obvious. They're just doing a bad job.
Chris, I mean, it really does make you wonder, would it be even worse the more time they have? I mean, would you just keep digging a hole? But as it is, I mean, what can you discern any closing argument other than talking about this joke about Puerto Rico? And what should that argument be in your view in the time remaining?
If you dig into the information in the states, you dig into the ads that are playing, you can discern a more intelligent, more traditional closing argument about Donald Trump is going to give tax breaks to the billionaires and not you. Donald Trump is bad for the economy. It will crash. Kamala Harris and Joe Biden create jobs. Donald Trump will not allow you to kill your baby. Things like that. But on the national level, in the media level, in D.C., in the speeches and in the rallies, no. They literally do think, and they're so excited about it. You read about it in Playbook, Washington Post, New York Times, CNN, ABC, CBS. They think that they finally got Donald Trump, and this is the dumbest part of all, because a comedian who he's not even pictured with, who was on the stage hours apart from him, made jokes that Jon Stewart thought were kind of funny, but didn't go over too well with the crowd, really probably shouldn't have been there, that they're going to call racist. If you haven't been able to convince the American people to not vote for Donald Trump, because even when you're calling him a racist, then calling someone he doesn't know, but who's somehow tangentially associated with the campaign racist, that's not going to change it either. It's kind of like when they tried to impeach Donald Trump over Russia, that didn't work. They went with Ukraine, which was even more obscure before the war. If you did basically before the war and the impeachment effort, if you didn't play Risk, you didn't know where Ukraine was unless you're from that part of the world. They keep on just getting more and more and more obscure, more and more off message. They came back for a moment to Hitler, who I think most people know. That seems to be the only history lesson that they actually understand. There was slavery in America. That's the only one where they know slavery existed. And there was Hitler, and he was bad. They don't really understand any other aspects of it. So at least that made a little bit more sense. But it's been failing to move the polls. Their super PACs have been warning about this. Their major super PACs have been warning about this. And no, I see no real unified message, just a whole lot of college Democrats screaming.
Bedford, I'm always yellow, and I always try and take over Australia first when I play
Smart.
Risk. And that's why I know where Ukraine is. But what our good friend and colleague Steve Deace always says is that when elections are about personalities, Democrats win. And when elections are about issues, Republicans win. But this year, if it's all personalities on the Democratic side, nobody likes Kamala Harris's personality, right? The more that we see it, even down this closing stretch, the more they don't like what they're seeing, and the odds keep going more into Donald Trump's favor. So what's your response to that this time?
Well, yeah, I think Steve's got a good point about history, but largely that's because Republicans have run such bad candidates. I mean, you didn't really have great Bob Dole, George H.W. Bush. It was easy to fall back and say, well, listen, we're smart, but you can't fit it on a bumper sticker like a Democrat's message where you run them against Bill Clinton or Barack Obama versus John McCain. That makes sense. But if you break it down here, Donald Trump has got someone who's got more personality. And it's not just that. Democrats' issues are more convoluted and more stupid than ever, more difficult to explain. Now it's actually easy for Republicans to explain some of their messaging now that it's gotten a little bit more populist. They'll say, bring jobs back to America, make America great again, secure the border, build the wall. Those are all very simple bumper stickers. Democrats' bumper stickers read what? Republicans want to stop gender identity suppression amongst children and to deny you access to life-saving care. It's much more difficult for them to explain those issues than it is for Republicans, which is why you've started to see them actually just kind of chimping off of a lot of Republicans' issues, repeating them. No tax on tips. It's a great thing for Republicans. It may make a difference in Nevada. And then at the end of the day, through no fault of their own, remember, they tried to run the last Bush in 2016. They were afraid here. They tried to run DeSantis. A lot of Republicans in D.C. were very excited about that, who's been a hero on conservative issues. But the personality, not so much. If he had been the nominee, Steve would be arguing that point again. It's not about personality, it's about the issues. But Donald Trump makes all of this so different. He's campy in a way. He's fun. He makes fun of himself. He's from like another time. That campiness, I think, kind of defangs a lot of him, despite what Democrats try to do. And at the same time, his issues are more explainable.
Chris, we have to talk about Biden. You brought him up, and this really cracks me up. I mean, a friend signaled me last night, and he said, do you realize Biden is Gollum, referring to the character in Lord of the Rings who's bad, who's corrupted, but because they keep him around, he inadvertently saves the day at the very end. And there's part of that to me that rings true right now because he's Donald Trump's best friend, whether he intends to be or not. So what's your take on the garbage people, the garbage comment? Because, man, that was just a gift out of left field.
I was shocked they allowed it to happen. I guess this is why they were not allowing Joe Biden to come to any of the rallies. They want to pretend like they like him and they care about him. Meanwhile, he is stewing in the White House. They literally just threw the closing speech rally in his front yard and did not invite him. So maybe there's something in the back of his head that's saying, I don't need to stay on message. I'm sure he's not getting briefed on what the campaign would like him to say. He's just sort of doing his own thing. And despite his best efforts, he is technically the most powerful person on the planet. He still has a megaphone. He can still hop on a Zoom call like he did right there. He's never been particularly artful with words. Also, let's not forget that Despite that he's senile, and despite the fact that he's really cultivated an image of a really condoling figure, a really good grandfatherly figure. I've been in DC now for over 20 years. Joe Biden has been a jerk, like a
Mhm.
massive, massive jerk for half of a century. The kind of guy who will stab you in the back, the kind of guy who will say real mean things under his breath and then pat you on the back when the cameras come around. Someone who is vicious, someone who, when he thought he wasn't going to be in office, which was all he really craved, decided to make deals with corrupt foreign governments with his idiot son. He's really excellent in an old school style way of slapping you on the back and just being Grandpa Joe. Behind the scenes, he says mean things. I mean, he said that Mitt Romney and Paul Ryan, two of the most milquetoast, awful Republican candidates of my lifetime, were going to quote, "put y'all back in chains." He said, "If you ain't black, or if you ain't voting for me, you ain't black." So it's not surprising he thinks that half the country is garbage. And Democrats keep on saying, "Well, this is the guy who actually goes out and talks to Republicans." Yeah, maybe he's still got an old school style, but he's made it clear for decades in his high-tech lynching of Clarence Thomas on down that he is willing to do anything for power, and he really does think half the country is garbage.